Welcome to the Canadian edition of The Gospel Truth with Andrew Womack, a teaching ministry that focuses on God's unconditional love and grace.
Where would we be if we hadn't had Andrew's teaching?
It has just really given me so many revelations.
He filled me with a new vision of myself.
I'm so grateful that he has been obedient to the calling that God has placed on his life.
And now, here's Andrew.
Welcome to our Friday's broadcast of the Gospel Truth. Today is the end of my first week teaching about Joseph. I've got this teaching entitled Lessons from Joseph in either CD or DVD form. And then also my staff has put together a brief summary. This is them taking my teaching and just condensing it into a very brief introductory type thing. And this is a freebie to you. We are asking for a donation of any amount for the CDs and DVDs, but we will give away this little introduction to Lessons from Joseph as our gift to you. And then we have a package deal where we're also offering my teaching on lessons from Elijah and lessons from David. And I tell you, I think that these are just tremendous. I've already covered a lot of material in the first 4 days of this week, and I'm going to be ministering on this for a number of weeks. But you may notice that I'm using my computer, which I don't normally do, but I have written so many footnotes in my living commentary on Joseph, and I've got references in here and stuff, and it's just easier for me to teach from my living commentary. We call it a living commentary because I'm still writing it. And if you get our commentary, I've written footnotes already on over 26,000. It's closer to 27,000 verses on the 31,000 verses in the Bible. And it's a living commentary because every time you go on our website, once you've purchased this and you go on our website, it will automatically download and update all of the changes that I've made, any additions that I've made, and new commentary verses that I've written. And so it's called the living commentary. Once I go to be with the Lord and I'm gone, then we'll probably call it the Andrew Womack commentary or something. But at the moment, it's the living commentary because it's still being written. And so I'm teaching from this living commentary the things that I've written about the life of Joseph. And again, I hadn't got time to go back and summarize all of that. We're in Genesis chapter 39 in verse 6. That's the last verse that I used. This is after Joseph has been sold by his brothers into slavery. They took him down to Egypt and he became a slave. And it says in verse 2 that God was with Joseph and he was a prosperous man. Man, I tell you, this really ministers to me because in the natural, looking at him, he wasn't prosperous. He had been sold into slavery. He was a slave. He was stripped naked. He had lost all of the favor. He was taken from his father. And in the natural, people would look at this and think there was nothing good in Joseph's life. And yet Genesis 39:2 says God was with him and he was a prosperous man. And Joseph was holding on to those visions, those dreams that God had given him. And because of it, instead of being depressed, instead of being bitter or angry, instead of giving up, he was serving his master Potiphar with everything he had. And because of it, Potiphar had promoted him and he was like cream. He started rising to the top. I tell you, it doesn't matter what situation you find yourself in. If you have a vision from God and if you don't let circumstances and people talk you out of what God has put in your heart, it's just a matter of time until you see those things come to pass. So let me take up again in Genesis chapter 39, verse 6, and it says, he, talking about Potiphar, the master of Joseph, left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favored. The NIV says, now Joseph was well built and handsome. And you know, there's a scripture over in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 26. It says, you see your calling, brethren, that God didn't choose many mighty, not many noble, but he chose the base things of the world, things that are despised, things that are nothing, to bring to naught things that are. And so as a general rule, it is not the handsome and well-built. It's not the people that have all of the great talents and abilities who God uses. And the reason for that, it goes on to say in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, I believe it's verse 29, the reason he did that is so that no flesh would glory in his presence. God chooses people that don't have everything in the natural going for them so that when He flows through them, God gets the credit instead of that person. But it's important to recognize that God is not against people that are well-built and handsome and have all of these things going for them. Joseph is an example of a person who in the natural, he was just an awesome, awesome person, and yet God still used him. God is not against people that have great talents and abilities. It's just that people that have those talents and abilities tend to depend upon themselves instead of depending upon God. And so God has to find somebody like me who has no natural great talents or abilities. I was listening to something just last night, and I wrote my staff and I said, man, can you improve my voice any? I mean, my voice, if I'd have been God, I wouldn't have chosen me, and just so many other things. But one of the reasons God chooses people that don't have things going for them is because it makes you God dependent. But He's not against people that have together. If you will humble yourself and do as Joseph did and put God first and hold on to what God says regardless of how bad circumstances get, God will use anybody, good or bad. And in the next verse, this is really important. These things, boy, this ministered to me, especially when I was in Vietnam. This ministered to me big time, these passages. In Genesis chapter 39, verse 7, it says, "It came to pass after these things that the master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, 'Lie with me.'" Old English for have sex with me. She was trying to seduce him. But he refused and said unto his master's wife. Now, first of all, before I get into what he said, let me just say that most people, if you had been the favored son, if you had a coat of many colors, if you were so filthy, stinking rich that you had everything, but then your brother sold you into slavery and here you became a slave, most people would be so bitter, they'd be so angry, they'd be so discouraged that, man, they'd just give up and say, what's the use? And if somebody presented them with an opportunity here, Joseph at this time was a virgin. He had never had any relationship with anybody, and here he is in a foreign land, been totally forgotten. You know, most people, the only reason that they have any standard of morality is because of the potential consequences that come with it. I actually saw a Reader's Digest thing, and I read this, that they actually put a billfold that had $100 in it, and it had the person's name, contact number, everything in it. And they did this as a test, and they just put this billfold on the sidewalk, and then they had hidden cameras, and they watched, and they had hundreds of people come, and they would get this billfold, they'd look in it, they'd see the money, and most of them would look both ways to see if anybody was watching, and then they'd just pocket it, and they'd walk off. And after they started walking off, they would stop them, and somebody would tell them, hey, this was a test. We put that there. You had a contact number. Why didn't you want to contact somebody? Why didn't you turn this in? And did you know out of all of those people, there was just a small percentage, like 10 or 15%, that actually returned it. And the majority of people said the reason they didn't return it, the reason they just kept it, is because they looked and they didn't think anybody saw, and there wasn't any consequences. In other words, that's what you call situational ethics. And you know, when I was in Vietnam, there was another guy that was there with me that we grew up together. We weren't real close, but we knew each other. We went to church together, and we had known each other our entire lives. We were both in Vietnam together. We weren't in the exact same spot, but we saw each other quite often. And anyway, when I was in Vietnam, every so often, I think it was every 6 weeks or something like that, they would bring the troops out of the field. And I mean, it was terrible conditions. Anyway, I could spend a lot of time, but it was really, really bad. And they would bring you back, and for 3 days, they would give the troops all of the booze that you could drink. You could get totally wasted. They brought in Filipino girls, and they put on a show, is what it officially was. It was a real sexual-oriented show, musical type of thing, and all of those Filipino girls just happened to be prostitutes, and so you could have all of the booze, there was drugs available, and all of the sex that you wanted for 3 days, and the government did this. for the troops. And this friend, who was a guy who was a friend of mine, back in the States, he would have never done anything like that. He wasn't a fanatic about God, but he knew God. He was born again. And in the States, he would have never acted like that. But in Vietnam, he participated in all of this stuff. Matter of fact, I was in a company of 200 people, and out of that 200 people, every time they'd bring us back for stand down, I was the only person out of 200 who did not go to the shows and participate. I was a chaplain's assistant, and my chaplain got drunk and got up on the stage and tried to strip naked and have sex with these Filipino girls in front of 200 people. I was the only person, including my chaplain, who didn't participate in this stuff. And you know why? It's just like this. This master's wife was saying to Joseph, come lie with me. And you know what? He could have gotten by with it. He could have thought, well, man, I deserve at least some gratification. And who was going to tell on him? Certainly the master's wife wasn't going to tell on him, because it would have been her head too. He could have gotten by with it. And most people who have just a situational ethics and only do what's right if they know they're going to be held accountable. Sad to say, that's the way that most people are. They don't have enough integrity to do what's right whether somebody's watching or not. This friend of mine in Vietnam, he participated in these things. He wouldn't have done it back in the States because it would have been a reflection on his family. It could have affected him in many different ways. But when you're on Vietnam, on the other side of the world, you may get killed next week. You don't know what's going to happen. And certainly nobody back home, none of your relatives are ever going to know what's happened. There was a lot of guys that wouldn't have ever lived that way in the States, but in Vietnam, they just let themselves go. They indulged every single appetite that they had. And Joseph right here, what he said to the master's wife spoke to me so loud and clear. Man, I have used this lots of time. It says in verse 8, but he refused and said unto the master's wife, behold, my master wanteth not what is with me in the house, and he hath committed all that he hath to my hand. There is none greater in his house than I, neither hath he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. And so Joseph had a sense of integrity and honor. He had been entrusted with something from his master, and he wasn't going to break that trust. It wasn't about him. It was about serving. He actually honored his master. This master, according to everything we know, wasn't a believer. He could have been a very ungodly man. We don't know. It doesn't say very much about him. But Joseph had a responsibility, and he honored his master. And so he listed that as his first thing. And then he went on to say here in this 9th verse, he says, how then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Boy, God spoke this to me big time when I was in Vietnam. Like I said, all of these temptations and things that came at you, you know, there is a desire to be accepted. There is a desire to not stand out and have people criticize you. I had people in Vietnam that would always call me preacher. They would make fun of me. I had people treat me like the plague. They would see me coming and walk the other direction. And, you know, if you like rejection, something's wrong with you. I didn't like that. And there was a desire to be accepted around these other people. There was a desire to be a part of something. And I remember back in Chu Lai, which was my division headquarters, it was on the South China Sea, that I could hear all of the music and all this screaming and yelling and things going on, and they'd be in this pavilion having these shows and stuff, and I'd be sitting out there on the beach, and I tell you, it was like a magnet drawing me about wanting to be accepted, to be a part of that. And yet this verse, God spoke to me, how could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? And this friend of mine who grew up in the same situation, basically had the same upbringing as I did, he wound up going in because it wasn't about his relationship with God. It was about, who's going to know? I'll never get caught. Everybody else is doing it. See, and if the only reason you're doing what's right is because you think that you're going to be answerable to somebody, you're going to somehow or another suffer for it, if that's the only thing that's causing you to do what's right, then I can guarantee you Satan will put you in some situation where it looks like you can get by with it and people will compromise, and this happens millions of times. But if you have a relationship with God, and if it's not about whether or not you get caught, it's not about whether anybody else knows. It's what does God say? See, this is what kept me when I was in Vietnam. I felt the temptation and the draw to be a part of what other people were doing and to be accepted by them. But man, I loved God more than I loved people. And I remember God using this verse to speak to me. And I thought, God, I can't do this. I don't care whether anybody else ever knows or not. You know. And I'm not going to live this way. I'm not going to take their free booze. I'm not going to take the free drugs and free sex. I'm not doing this stuff because I had a relationship with God. I actually spoke at a Christian school in Kansas City one time. It had 500 people in it. And while I was waiting to speak, I was reading their pamphlet about their thing. And the number one thing they said, positive peer pressure. And that's how they were advertising their school. Because it was a Christian school and because there was Christian kids there, then they were going to use peer pressure to influence them positively versus like public school where there was negative peer pressure. And even though I understood the point that they were making, did you know that's still the wrong way to do things? Because you're training them to be a part of a group. Now, if it's a Christian group, well, then that's great, but you're training them to just have a herd mentality and to do what it takes to be accepted with everybody else. What happens when you take them out of that Christian environment and put them in a situation like in Vietnam or something where there's no restrictions and you could have all of the evil that you want? Well, that same peer pressure that you used in this Christian school and used positive peer pressure would cause those people to go along with others just to get along. And see, that's wrong. Peer pressure should not be the motivation for anything. It's all personal relationship with God. And this is one of the things about Joseph that just really ministered to me and blessed me, is that Joseph was going to honor the person who had entrusted him with everything, including his wife. That's an integrity. You know, it says in Proverbs chapter 11 that the integrity of the upright will direct his steps. What that means is that if you have made a commitment that, God, I'm going to serve you and I'm going to do what's right, whether it's popular or not. Did you know that that puts boundaries? And it makes you live within these boundaries. And it doesn't matter whether other people change or whether anything. You're going to do what's right. That's integrity. So Joseph had integrity, and that was going to limit what he could do because he was honoring his master. But the bottom line is, the biggest thing was, how could I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Brothers and sisters, I'm telling you, this ought to be a verse that just becomes a mantra for every single person watching this. That you make a decision that, God, I am going to do what's right and I am not going to sin against you. It doesn't matter what anybody else says. So much of the Christian life, they say things like, don't go out and have, sexual immorality because there's sexually transmitted diseases. And if you do, it's like playing Russian roulette. It's just a matter of time until you come down with some kind of a disease. That's all true. But that's not the real motive. What would happen if they had a cure for all sexually transmitted diseases? Does that mean now it's okay for you to go have sexual relationships? No. Yes, it's true that there are consequences to sin, but the bottom line is the real motivation ought to be that this is about your relationship with God. God, I'm not going to sin against you. What would happen if they came up with a cure for AIDS so that you could have homosexual relationships and it would never affect you? Even if they had a cure for it, it would still be wrong because you aren't honoring God. He says from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female, that marriage is between a male and a female. And it doesn't matter what the society says. See, right now we have a lot of Christians that are caving on this issue because society now has embraced homosexuality and they basically have put their stamp of approval on it. And even those who don't agree with that lifestyle believe that you're wrong if you sit there and say that homosexuality is wrong. So it is not popular to stand on what the Word of God says. And a lot of Christians are caving on this because it's all about what everybody else is doing. It's not about your personal relationship with God. I'm telling you, you're missing it if that's you. This is one of the lessons that I learned from Joseph. And I tell you, I love this. This man, he had a relationship with God. God had shown him that God was going to promote him and that someday his brothers would come and bow down to him. He had a vision that restrained him and that kept him on path, and he refused to deviate from it. Man, I love that. It says in the next verse, and it came to pass as she spake to Joseph, this is talking about Potiphar's wife, the master's wife, as she spake to Joseph day by day, that he hearkened not unto her to lie by her or to be with her. Boy, this is another great thing. You know, the scripture says, flee fornication. But then it says in James 4:7, resist the devil and he'll flee from you. You can't just flee from the devil. You have to resist the devil, but you can flee from temptation. Most people are resisting temptation, but fleeing from the devil. The exact opposite of what God says. You should flee from situations that bring you into temptation. You should flee from movies and things that tempt you and plant these desires in your heart. You shouldn't use movies that promote adultery and fornication and stuff for entertainment. Man, you need to be focused upon God. You need to flee all of this sexual sin and then resist the devil. Joseph fled from this master's wife. He refused to even be around her. In the next verse it says, and it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business. So apparently, even though the previous verse says he hearkened not to lie with her or to be with her, something demanded that he had to go into the house to conduct the business that his master had given him. And while he was there, it says, he came into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. Apparently, in previous times, there was other people in the house, and so that prevented him being alone with her. But this time, nobody else was around. And in verse 12, it says, she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Man, he fled from fornication. This shows a attitude in Joseph's heart that, man, he didn't just, deal with this in some passive way, try and not offend the wife. He didn't care. He was not going to let her compromise him. So he fled and left his garment in her hand, probably a coat or an outer garment. In verse 13 it says, and it came to pass when she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of her house and spake unto them, saying, see, he hath brought in a Hebrew unto us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. This was a total lie on her part. And this illustrates something else. And that is that what this woman had for Joseph wasn't love. It was nothing but lust. And when she was rebuffed by Joseph, her so-called love turned into hatred overnight. Boy, this is something that I wished I could make people understand. Sexual immorality is so glorified and promoted in our society, and I'm out of time. I'm going to have to say these things tomorrow. Man, I got carried away. Real quickly, let me just say that we've got this little introductory thing on lessons from Joseph, and then I have CDs and DVDs. Listen to our announcer, and he'll give you all the information about it. And join me again next Monday as we continue the gospel truth.
Andrew is offering his booklet, Lessons from Joseph, as his free gift to you today. This offer is limited to one free booklet per household and is available in the US, UK, Canada, and Australia. Contact us today to receive your free booklet. Andrew's complete series, Lessons from Joseph, is available in either a CD or DVD album or as a USB made from our daily television broadcast. Each of these resources is available when you contact us. This entire series is also available for audio download, absolutely free from our website. Or you can get these products as part of the lessons package in your choice of either CD, DVD, or USB from Lessons from Joseph, Lessons from David, and Lessons from Elijah. Also, this package will include the Lessons from Joseph booklet. These teachings will give you the chance to learn from the successes and mistakes of 3 very powerful but very human men of God. The lessons package has a catalog value of $125, but you can receive all of these valuable resources today for just $90. We also want to remind you of Andrew's Living Commentary software. The Living Commentary includes more than 50 years of Andrew's Bible study notes and personal encounters with God. Get Andrew's Living Commentary today for $135. Go to our website at awmc.ca and click on today's TV offer under the Store tab to see all the ways you can get these products. Or you can call the Andrew Wommack Ministries Canada helpline Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Time at 647-348-2220 to order.
Before I came to Charis, I was a mess. I didn't know my purpose, and I didn't even really know who God was. But when I came to Charis, I learned who I am in Christ. I learned identity. I learned to have a relationship with God, and I met Christ. And then it was after first and second year getting a foundation, it was in third year that I discovered my purpose. I discovered my destiny, and I walk in my call every day now. I walk in relationship with God daily, and my life is not the same. There's no going back. So come to Charis, discover your purpose, find your destiny, and walk in your calling.
I'd like to let all of you, our Canadian viewers, know that we have a Bible college in Toronto, and we would love to have you come and be a part of it. There's multiple ways you can take advantage, not only through the campus there in Toronto, but we have online courses, we have correspondence courses, just a number of ways, but we want to help you, and we're making it as available to you as we possibly can. So check it out. The information's on your screen, our Charis Bible College, Toronto.
If Andrew's teachings are making a difference in your life, consider becoming a Grace Partner with Andrew Wommack Ministries Canada today. Grace Partners are special friends of the ministry who commit to giving $30 or more per month to help Andrew reach thousands of people here in Canada and around the world with the life-changing message of God's unconditional love and grace. If you'd like to become a Grace Partner today, go to awmc.ca. Thank you for your support, and we look forward to hearing from you today. For 20 years, Andrew Wommack has been sharing the message of God's unconditional love and grace through his half-hour television program Monday through Friday. Now, Andrew is broadcasting a full hour-long teaching each week.
When God finds somebody who wants to be a giver and wants to bless somebody else, He will give seed to the sower. He will give seed to people who will sow it and give it to other people.
Watch the weekend edition of Gospel Truth with Andrew Wommack.